And personality. Let's take a look. We're going to look at the 20 statements test. It's really a fascinating test because there's not much to it, but it gives you tons and tons of good information. Let's go ahead and take a quick look. There we go. The test takes the form of a survey with respondents asked to give up to 20 responses to prompts like "Who am I?" So that's all the questions asked. Who am I? I am. That's all. That's it. And they have to come up with 20 things that they are or that they am. And they don't have to answer all 20 questions. They can answer 5, 10, 15, however many they want. The test usually only takes a few minutes. The test is unusual in utilizing an open question methodology, making coding non-straightforward. And that's a problem, and I misspelled straightforward. Kuhn in 1960 has stated that responses to the 20 statements test should be grouped in 5 categories: social groups and classifications, ideological beliefs, interests, ambitions, and self-evaluations. So it's an old test. It's been around for a long time, and we've done it, we've given it to a lot of different people. So there you go. Who am I? I am. And the 20 statements test is one of the most widely used cross-cultural psychological measures. Americans most often mention personal traits, attitudes, and abilities, which accounted for about 48% of their self-description. The American pattern is similar to many other Western cultures: Australia, Britain, Sweden, Canada. Most of the Western people answer the questions in this way. So, and of course, I don't understand. That's the TikTok or Instagram picture that everybody seems to want to take. They want to make the fishy kiss kiss face or something. When other cultural groups were given the same measure, the results are very different. The Maasai and Samburu of Kenya have only 2% of their self-descriptions reflect personal characteristics. 60% of their description encompass their social membership and their roles because they are collectivist. The Maasai and Samburu, a pattern of a greater emphasis on roles and memberships, appears in cultures from much of the rest of the world, and these cultural differences are already evident among kindergarten children. They gave the 20 questions test to all of these individuals: the Cook Islanders, the Malaysians, the Chinese, Native Americans, other Africans other than the Kenyans, Puerto Ricans, Indians, and Japanese, and they got pretty much the same answers. These young ladies over here are Cook Islanders. A Danish study by Ma et al. Looked at functional MRIs when participants were evaluating personal characteristics. The Danish participants showed no difference in their functional MRIs when they considered their social roles or their personal characteristics. Both involved the medial prefrontal cortex, which is typically activated in self-judgments. When the researchers performed the same functional MRIs on Chinese participants, their medial prefrontal cortex was only activated when they were considering personal characteristics. When the Chinese thought of their social roles, their temporoparietal junction was activated, and that's the temporoparietal junction right there in the back. Yeah, it's the back. This is a region that more typically is involved in understanding other people's beliefs. Ma et al. In 2012 suggests that Chinese participants were more likely thinking about other people's beliefs when they thought about their social roles. Though we are all individuals, humans are also a highly social species. Social interaction is a continuous balancing act between focusing on our differences and seeking our connections with others. And this is a picture, and you may think, oh, all Koreans look alike. But the reality is that some guy took his face and put it on all of these different people. And I'm not exactly sure what he was trying to say. Marcus and Kitayama first identified the independent view of the self in 1991. Independent individuals experience their identities as largely distinct from their relationships. Independent individuals are self-defining. Their attitudes, their personality traits, their preferences, opinions, abilities, and individual qualities. The self's experiences are rather stable and does not change much from situation to situation. The independent view of self is experienced as self-contained and exists as a relatively coherent and inviolate entity. Relationships vary and are fluid as individuals tend to be closer to close relations than distant relations. Individuals with independent identity still feel much closer to in-group than out-group members. However, they do not view them in fundamentally distinct ways. The main bifurcation is between self and non-self, and both in-group and out-group members are non-selves. Marcus and Kitayama, 1991, also identified the interdependent self. The self overlaps quite a bit with an individual's significant relationships. Interdependent individuals are closely connected with others and are not experienced as distinct, unique entities. Interdependent entities are grounded in their relationships with others. Relationships come in a variety of forms, and they require people to take on particular roles, such as father, student, friend, lover, daughter, that govern how they feel and behave toward their relationship partners. The identity of the interdependent individual is experienced as somewhat fluid in different situations. Depending on the situation and the role that the person occupies in that situation, the person's experience of their self will vary accordingly. So you feel like you're a different person when you're in a different context. Relationships with one's in-group members are self-defining for those with interdependent selves. Thus, the people in the in-group assume considerable importance. People do not easily become in-group members, nor do close relationships easily dissipate into out-group relations. In 2007, Zhu, Zhang, Fan, and Han conducted an interesting functional MRI experiment on Western and Chinese participants. They asked the participants whether select trait adjectives characterized themselves or their mothers. Westerners showed different regions of the brain activation, suggesting that they represent themselves and their mothers in distinct ways. When the Chinese were evaluating themselves or their mothers, they showed activation patterns in the same regions for the two tasks, the medial prefrontal cortex, an area linked with self-representations. So they saw their mothers as extensions of themselves. Independent selves have a number of close relationships with members of their in-group. However, these relationships are less self-defining than are the corresponding relationships of those with more interdependent selves. Interdependent selves identify more strongly with their in-group, while independent selves have a more permeable relationship. Because in-group relations are so critical for self-definition for people in more interdependent cultures, and because they serve to direct appropriate behaviors, it is especially necessary to identify those with whom one has such significant relationships, your in-group. Obligations to others are an important part of the in-group relations among interdependent people, so it is of vital importance for them to distinguish those toward whom they have obligations from those they do not. Becoming a member of an interdependent individual's in-group is thus a rather substantial accomplishment, and such relationships should be entered cautiously. In other words, you can't maintain too many friends. A more independent person is likely to perceive themselves as existing and functioning separately from the social environment. The environment is more tangential to the independent person's identity. Relationships can be formed and broken without having a large impact on the independent person's identity. And a good example of this is me. So how in the world can I come down to the Navajo Nation where I have no relationships and function? How in the world did I do that? Unless I'm an interdependent person. If I'm an independent person, I'm sorry. If I were an interdependent person, I couldn't do that. I would have to stay home. I would have to be in Iowa with my significant others, and I wouldn't be able to pull myself away. But because I have lived an independent life, I've been able to do that. So you can imagine, I I don't even recognize my extended family, and these people aren't really that important to me. But my students are important to me. So I create relationships with relatively superficial relationships, of course, but still relationships with a lot of different people. People with independent selves are more willing to form new relationships, maintain a larger network of relationships, and be less distressed should any of these relationships fade away over time, which of course all of you will fade away over time. Right now I have whatever degree of relationship I have, but over time, of course, our communication will probably only be if you need a letter of recommendation or something. For independent persons, in groups and out groups are less consequential to self construction. There is convergent evidence of heightened distinction between in groups and out groups among those who are more interdependent. Collectivistic cultures, such as the Japanese, richly describe this pronounced difference in behavior between contexts involving in-groups, uchi, and those involving out-groups, soto. So the people that are in your group, this is Sailor Moon, I think. These girls are all dressed up like Sailor Moon. They are an uchi, and people not dressed up like Sailor Moon are soto. And the only reason I know Sailor Moon is because of Big Bang Theory. They talked about Sailor Moon all the time. Studies have found that Asian Americans were more accurate than European Americans in identifying emotions experienced by their close friends. European Americans were more accurate than Asian Americans in identifying the emotions that were experienced by strangers. Why? Because Asians recognize in groups strongly and out groups not very much. So, as Americans, we have all these superficial relationships. So, as as European Americans, we recognize all these superficial, we are more likely to recognize emotions from superficial relationships. In places like Japan, where commitment to in-group members are strong, there should be less of a willingness to cooperate with outgoing members. People with interdependent selves focus their trust on people they share some kind of relationship. Yamagishi and Yamagishi in 1994 found that Americans tend to have higher levels of general trust than the Japanese do. Bond and Smith in 1996 found that people with more interdependent views of self are more likely to conform than those with more independent views. This may be because people with more interdependent selves view in-group members as an extension of themselves while maintaining distance from out-group members. And this is a curious picture because the United States opened up Japan. Japan was a hermit country until 1840, and then the U.S. Navy opened up their ports, opened up the Japanese ports. So the first non-Japanese that people saw were American sailors, and this is a picture that someone drew of an American sailor when they first opened up the ports. Look at his ears and his nose and all the hair. Okay. We are cuties, aren't we? In 1983, IBM tasked psychologist Gert Hofstede to assess their employees' opinions and interests. IBM tasked psychologist Gert Hofstede to assess the IBM employees for their opinions and their interests. Hofstede administered questionnaires to 117,000 employees in 40 countries. Hofstede was able to map the individualism of all the employees in each country. The country scores show a clear and striking pattern, and this, of course, is Hofstede. Hofstede discovered that the most individualistic country in the world is the United States, closely followed by other English-speaking countries and by Western European nations. The most individualistic, that would be Kim Kardashian. Countries that scored high in collectivism were various nations in Latin America and Asia. Other research has found similar results. So the most collectivist country in the world is the United States. Collectivism has been found to dominate in Asia, Africa, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and the South Pacific. Most people participate in collectivistic cultures where interdependent selves are more common. These countries encompass more than 80% of the world's population, and the two largest countries in the world, the two most populous countries in the world, China and India. There's Russia, the largest country in the world. They're all collectivistic, as is Southern Europe, as is all of Africa, as is all of South America. Wow. The state with the highest collectivism score by far was Hawaii, probably because of that state's large population of people with Asian ancestry. The next most collectivistic states were Utah and the states of the Confederate South. The least collectivistic states were in the Mountain West, the Great Plains, the Northeast, and the Midwest. Individualism varies as a function of social class. Specifically, people from higher socioeconomic backgrounds tend to have more independent selves than those from poorer backgrounds within the same country. Wealthier Icelandic children tend to describe themselves more in terms of inner psychological traits than poorer Icelandic children do. Middle-class American parents emphasize the importance of self-direction to their children, whereas working-class American parents place greater value on conforming to authority figures. That's how you get along. That's how you survive. You conform to authority figures. And this is what we may see in the election, as interesting as that is. Why are all these working class white people voting for Trump? Because he's more authoritarian. Interdependent messages are a better fit with the American students from working class background. Some of the highest concentrations of universities in the United States are in the Northeast and the Midwest, where individualism is more pronounced. Psychological research within the United States has been largely conducted with participants who are even more individualistic than most other Americans. Now, this is really easy to see if you look at Division III football. They're small liberal arts independent colleges. There's more of those than there are at all other colleges combined, Division III colleges. And if we look at all the Division III colleges in the United States, they're almost all in New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois. Not very many in the South, not very many in the West. They stop right at right at Iowa. Well, there's some in Nebraska, but there are hardly any in Missouri. There are a rare few in the Northwest, but there are none in Arizona and New Mexico. I don't think. I can't think of any. Anyway. Other cultural dimensions that researchers have investigated include societal tightness versus looseness. Societal tightness characterizes how strong cultural norms are and how tolerant cultures are of deviant behavior. This predicts the level of prevention, focus, impulse control, and self-regulation. And here they are, hanging witches, of course. What else is there to do? Another cultural dimension that has been investigated are cultural values. Values are for universalism, benevolence, conformity, tradition, security, power, achievement, hedonism. And hedonism means wanting to have a good time, only wanting to have a good time, and sacrificing everything to have a good time. Stimulation, self-direction. Other cultural dimensions that have been investigated: power distance, uncertainty avoidance, vertical horizontal social structure, relationship structure, context dependence, social cynicism, and complexity. One of the difficulties in studying cultural psychology is that individuals tend to be varied and complex. Cultures are highly variable and are resistant to categorization. All cultures are highly heterogeneous and contain a great variety of people. Cultural differences this book describes reflect general patterns of differences and not all or nothing statements. You can't make all or nothing statements about anything. A number of researchers have identified women as more interdependent than men. The features of independent entities seem more characteristic of men than of women. There are issues of gender equality in most cultures. Women represent only 3% of the elected officials in Arab nations. Women represent 45% of the Swedish parliament. In Brazil, 50% of the men and women are literate. In Pakistan, twice as many men are literate as women. As a matter of fact, now that the Taliban have taken over the government, it is illegal for women to go to school. In the Netherlands, Germany, and Finland, on the average, people expressed views that men and women should be treated quite similarly. In India, Pakistan, and Nigeria, people tended to believe that roles, obligations, and rights of men and women are clearly different, with men being perceived to have more rights than women. Within a culture, men and women tended to share fairly similar views about gender equality. In India, Pakistan, and Nigeria, women tended to embrace the gendered attitudes of their respective countries. In every case except two reversals in Malaysia and Pakistan, males have a significantly more traditional gender view than females, probably because traditional gender views benefit men more than women. And this is an old Van Heusen Thai advertisement, and as you can see, this is from the 1950s, so don't get too excited. If men wear a tie, of course, then the women will feed them breakfast in bed. Countries in which large percentages of the population practice Christianity, in particular Protestantism, were more likely to have egalitarian gender views, whereas countries with a large percentage of Muslims were associated with more traditional gender views. And this is, of course, Martin Luther hammering the 99 points on the basilica at Worms in Germany. Oddly, more northern countries express more egalitarian views, and more southern countries express more traditional gender views. The more urbanized the country, the more likely the country will have egalitarian views. A country's individualism score correlated positively with egalitarian views. One way to look at gender and culture is to determine which gender identity is viewed to be more essential, which gender is thought to reflect an underlying unchangeable essence, which gender has less flexible ways of being expressed in a socially approved way. Americans tend to view male gender identity to be more essentialized than female gender identity. Most Americans do not seem to find it disturbing or unusual for women to present themselves like men, wearing pants, having short hair, not wearing facial makeup, or participating in stereotypically male behaviors, girls playing with trucks or girls playing ice hockey. So this is okay. This not so much. This would not be an accepted. Not well. Maybe more now than when this book was written. Many Americans do find it disturbing or unusual for men to present themselves as women, wearing dresses, high heels, or lipstick, or to participate in stereotypically female behaviors, playing with dolls or taking ballet lessons. Male identity is less changeable and thus more essentialized in the United States. In Hindu myths, many more male gods change into female goddesses than female goddesses change into gods. The Hindu religion involves goddess worship, and many of the most powerful gods are female: Kali, Parvati, Durga, and Maya. According to the Hindu religion, female identity is viewed as pure, strong, and powerful. In India, the male gender identity was more mutable and less essentialized than the female gender. There's Kali. That was Kali back here. Kali's the one with the sword with all the men's heads. You know they're men because they have mustaches. There we go. Kali, Parvati, Durga, and Maya. Maya's so is Parvati. I worked with a lady named Parvati. I didn't realize her name. She was a goddess. Festinger in 1957 proposed that people have a powerful motivation to be consistent, and their cognitive dissonance is the distressing feeling that we have when we observe ourselves acting inconsistently. The belief that we can easily change and are expected to change is referred to as an incremental theory of self. Traits are malleable and can be improved. Aspects of the self are largely resistant to change, which is known as an entity theory of self. Individuals with this view see their attributes to be largely inborn. Genetic. I can't change. This is the way my intelligence is. No, intelligence will grow and develop. Okay. Entity and incremental self theories. Research found that 60% of the Chinese high school students said that the key to success in math is to study hard. In contrast, less than 25% of American high school students felt this way. Japanese believe more than Americans that intelligence is based on how hard you try rather than on what they are born with. To get into a good American university, you typically need to get an acceptable score on the SAT test. The SAT, the T stands for test, so SAT test is a redundancy. The SAT was originally designed to measure innate aptitudes and not efforts in one's classes. It turns out that studying hard can increase one's SAT score significantly. This has been a source of frustration for the test makers because the tests are no longer serving the function they were originally designed for, which has sparked much policy debate about their utility. IQ tests are regularly given in public schools in the United States, and the results influence decisions on whether students should attend gifted or remedial classes. In Japan, to get into a good university, you need to do well on university entrance exams that test your mastery of a large amount of material. Now, the curious thing about Japanese universities, and I didn't realize this, but Japanese universities, you don't really study hard. What you do is you accumulate information. It's kind of like they don't grade you, and nothing starts until the fourth year of your college. And then, if you decide to go into law, of course, or medicine, then that's the direction you head. But as long as you can pass your exams, you can get into college, and it's like 4 free years for you. There's not a whole lot to it. I was a little surprised. The Japanese bar exam to become a lawyer is notoriously difficult. Only 2.5% of the people pass it every year, and those who do, on average, have failed the exam 4 times before ultimately succeeding. Approximately 2/3 of those taking the American bar exam each year pass it, with about 3/4 of them passing it on the first attempt. The 5-factor model of personality started as a personality profile test developed to test U.S. Air Force officers in the 1950s by Tupes and Crystal. And this is Tupes right here. That's a picture of Tupes. Tupes and Crystal used factor analysis to determine which of Cattell's 16 personality factors were significant. They came up with 5 that factored as most important over and over again. Remember, they were trying to figure out how to select good Air Force officers. They worked for the RAND Corporation. And these are Catel's 16 personality factors: warmth, reasoning, emotional stability, dominance, liveliness, rule consciousness, social boldness, sensitivity, vigilance, abstractedness, privateness, apprehension, openness to change, self-reliance, perfectionism, and tension. And these are the 5 factors that Tupes and Cattell or Crystal selected. Openness to experience reflects a person's intelligence and curiosity about the world. Conscientiousness indicates how responsible and dependable an individual is. Extroversion indicates how much an individual is active and dominant. Agreeableness is the extent to which a person tends to be warm and pleasant. Neuroticism is the degree to which an individual can be seen as emotionally stable and unpredictable. So these are the 5 factors that they felt that Air Force officers needed. The 5-factor model proposes that all personality traits largely reflect some combination of these 5 core traits. All personality traits should show significant correlations with at least one, if not more, of these core traits. The 5 factors can be seen to reflect the basic structure of personality. There is a question as to how well the 5-factor structure generalizes elsewhere. An analysis of indigenous Chinese personality trait terms found a set of factors that were not the same as the Big 5. Rather, 4 factors emerged that were captured by the following labels: dependability, reflecting responsibility, optimism, and trustworthiness. Remember, the Chinese are collectivists. Interpersonal relatedness, reflecting harmony, drift, relational orientation, and tradition. That fits the collectivist model as well. Social potency, reflecting leadership, adventurousness, and extroversion. And individualism, reflecting logical orientation, defensiveness, and self-orientation. Similar approaches have been taken in other cultures. Researchers looking at the Filipino personality traits discovered 2 additional traits to the Big 5. Temperamentalness and a negative valence dimension. And what this meant was that temperamentalness was a factor of authoritarian, of being an authoritarian. And a negative valence dimension means that you see the people under you as negative. An investigation of 11 different language groups in South Africa revealed 9 underlying factors, some of which overlap with the Big 5, but the other factors that did not: integrity and relationship harmony. And of course, South Africa is, the majority of the people in South Africa are black, are black Africans. And of course, in order for these people to get along, integrity and relationship harmony is massive. Some studies in other languages reveal evidence for factors in addition to the Big 5. Other studies sometimes do not find evidence for all 5 of the Big 5 traits. In particular, openness to experience is a trait that emerges the least consistently in studies conducted in other languages. And this is Romania, and that was one of the factors in Romania as well. Openness to experience, people in the United States, of course, they immigrated here, and they move around a lot. And that is something that is you don't see in other countries around the world. And for that reason, this is Romania, of course. That's the Romanian flag. Anyway, they had different factors. The north central Great Plains, especially around Minnesota and Wisconsin, is the epicenter for friendly and conventional cluster, as residents are the highest in the country for the traits of extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. And this is Wisconsin and Minnesota, and Iowa's right there. Maybe that's why I want to live here, because people are so nice. The western states from Oregon down to Arizona house the relaxed and creative cluster, where there is the lowest neuroticism and the highest openness to experience. The northeastern states, especially New York and Massachusetts, are home to the temperamental and uninhibited cluster, where people score the highest on neuroticism and the lowest in conscientiousness. And I had a student that was teaching out in Salem, Massachusetts, and he hated it. And the reason he hated it was because the people were so mean. They were temperamental. They were uninhibited. They were not very nice. And that is the end of the lecture. I'll talk to you guys next week.